It's 7 p.m. Central European Summer Time. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all of you, and welcome to another episode of webinar series of Usomi. I'm Gennaro Danna from Legnano near Milan, Italy, and I'm very happy this evening to moderate this session. As usual, I would like to remember that you can give us the question using the chat box and the question and answer box. And as usual, as me as moderator, I'm very happy and pleased to have on my side Penar Yilmaz from Netherlands that will introduce the speaker. Penar?
Thank you very much, Gennaro. We're very happy to have one of our board members of Usomi today. Renato Cuocolo is currently an associate professor at the Department of Medicine and Surgery and Dentistry in Scuola Medicina Salernitana, if I say that correctly, of the Salerno in Italy. He also did a PhD in biomorphological and surgical sciences at the Department of Advanced Biomedical Sciences in Naples. And amongst like a lot of networks, Usomi is just one of the networks and societies that Renato is participating in. But today you will enlighten us about a very interesting tool, a quality scoring tool for radiomics, which was published this year, beginning of this year in Insights of Medicine. So we're very happy and pleased to have you, Renato, and please tell us more about the tool.
Sure, thank you for the kind introduction. And yes, today we will talk about the methodological radiomics score, which is a quality scoring tool for radiomics research. And as a disclosure, I have to say that I am part of the authors that developed the tool and in the paper. So obviously I might be a little bit biased, and you should take that into account during this presentation. So we will touch upon different points that led to the development of the metric score, and hopefully assess what it could provide us in the future, and why we should be interested in this tool going forward. So we will start from auditing in general, and the auditing process is actually something that has been standardized and well-defined in medicine. It's fairly common in other fields such as economics and also in clinical practice somewhat, but I think it's also applicable to research. And essentially, it's a quality improvement process aimed at improving outcomes, which can be patient care in the clinical setting, but research quality in the research setting, and translation of research into clinical practice, through which means systematic review of the current practices against some established criteria. And we will see how this actually can be applied to radiomics and AI research. And it's not unknown of in medicine and the radiology research, for example, in the context of clinical trials, we have data auditing, but also in some ways, peer review in itself is a form of auditing, even if it's not as well codified in terms of standards to apply. And this auditing process can then be broken down in 6 steps as defined by NICE, identifying a problem, identifying and setting the standards we should expect in a given situation, measuring the current practice and comparing it with the standards we have identified, and very important, then implementing some changes based on the results of this process, and hopefully improving our results, and then remeasuring the quality of the process in itself. So it should be an iteration upon iteration and leading to progressively improving results overall. So we should first start by identifying the problem, which led to the development of metrics. And by looking at radiomics and AI research, we see that there are currently low levels of evidence. This is true for radiology in general, where prospective clinical trials are not as common as in other fields of medicine, more clinically oriented fields especially. We have, especially in the first years since the term radiomics was introduced in 2012, lack of transparency in the presentation of the methods and the explanation of what authors were actually doing to obtain the reported results. And this is still an issue today, low availability of data for replication and reproduction of the studies. This has been improving, but mostly tied to pressure from funding bodies. But it's also true that this is hard in medicine in general, given that there are regulations against easy sharing of medical data. Hopefully, this will be addressed in the future and improved. And the Uzome radiomics auditing group in part also contributed to RadBase, which is a repository focused on improving transparency and replicability of studies in radiomics. But essentially, this was also a systematic review, which shows how the issues that we have been mentioning are actually well present, unfortunately, in radiomics research currently, because we will see that while many of the papers that were included in this review share the models, 50%, these are essentially just tied to weights in linear regression models, so fairly straightforward and very hard not to share. While we see that if we go and look at which papers performed external validation or which papers allowed full reproducibility of the pipeline, the percentages fall quite a bit. And why do these limitations matter? These limitations matter because if the research is not convincing, if we as physicians read these papers, and there are a lot of radiomics papers pretty much in any journal right now in the past few years, and they do not convince us, or we do not see that there is adoption of these tools in clinical practice, what happens is that we can undermine the clinical translation of radiomics and AI in clinical practice, and ultimately we could harm the patients in the long run because we limit accessibility to tools that could actually be disruptive for our current workflow. And this also matters because we also have to consider that an essential step, an essential component in clinical adoption of radiomics and AI is also trust by the users and having faith in these tools, that these tools are reliable and they do work. And quality research based on these tools is a core concept behind developing this trust in physicians who are both readers of the journals and users of the tools, ideally, in the future. We also have to note, however, that there is also another issue compared, for example, to other fields like pharmaceutics or hardware companies. There is a lack of support also due to the fact that most of the companies are still startups and fairly small in scale, and they don't have the resources to support and fund this kind of research themselves. But we should demand more support from industry because currently most major trials and prospective trials are only funded through public institutions and big programs such as the Horizon Europe program, but that's not enough, and we should expect more, as is done in other fields of medicine. If you want to push your own products, you should also support the research that demonstrates that these products actually work and that they provide added value in practical terms. So let's shift from the problems to the solutions. We have to set the standards. Luckily, big societies have stepped up on this topic, and we have the claim checklists and the guidelines produced by major players in the RSNA, and we have the CLEAR checklist, which has been endorsed both by the European Society of Radiology and the European Society of Medical Imaging Informatics, which is hosting this webinar. And after the publication, we do have the tools to assess the quality and perform the audit, matching in some way the standards set by the claim and CLEAR checklists. And we have the Radiomics Quality Score tool and the Matrix tool, which is the main topic of this talk. But we have to mention the RQS and explain why Matrix was developed if the RQS was already available. This was the first tool developed for this task, and actually it predates the checklists that have set the standards, as it is dated from as it was first introduced in 2017, and it leads to a quality score based on an absolute score ranging from a -8 to +36, which is then converted to a percentage scale, and it was intended to be used by editors, reviewers, and readers to assess the quality of research and help them navigate this novel topic, as radiomics was still fairly new and most people did not have the background to actually break down what was going on. And it has had a big success. As we can see, recent research on PubMed, very quick, gave up more than 140 papers using or mentioning the radiomics quality score in their title or abstract. And it had some positive impact, I think, overall, because it helped highlight issues in radiomics and AI. Common recurring issues from RQS reviews were lack of external validation, practices leading to information leakage, lack of open science, and it brought overall attention to the process of research auditing, and in some way it was also part of the basis for the creation of the Usomi Radiomics Auditing Group, which then used it to perform its initial research and then develop also the metric score. But the RQS also has some limitations, otherwise we would not be here talking about metrics. It was developed very opaquely. It was just part of a systematic review, kind of a side note of this systematic review when it was first introduced. So there are no great details on how it was actually developed, how the items were selected, how the weights were assigned. And if you use the RQS, this leads to some choices that may be questionable for the user, who may not be entirely confident on why the scores are distributed how they are. And also the item definitions are not very clear, and it's not clear how they were created, which leads to practical issues in terms of reproducibility from one user to another especially, but for less experienced users also there is a limitation in inter-rater reproducibility, as we will see. And last but not least, the RQS was essentially designed with one study type in mind, which is a classical handcrafted radiomics study with feature extraction through manual segmentation, such as can be done with Radiomics or other software that then extract quantitative features, but it did not account for deep learning or segmentation tools or other approaches that vary from this paradigm, which then negatively affect the score of the papers. And the scoring itself, this is from a paper that has been recently accepted, so hopefully it will be available soon, is not linear because it has this kind of U shape where it tends to overestimate the quality of very bad scoring papers because all the negative scores are upscored to a 0% when converting to a percentage scale, while it tends to underestimate the quality of papers that score better. And this in turn has led to consistently low scores in all RQS-based systematic reviews that we can see collected here in this bar chart on the right. And regarding reproducibility, what I was mentioning is confirmed by this recent publication where we focused especially on this topic involving 3 groups of readers with varying degrees of experience with and without training. And we can see that while the intra-rater reproducibility was moderate to excellent based on the experience level of the user, which can be okay, inter-rater was surely another story and not as satisfying. So these limitations were part of the reasons that we had in mind when we decided to try and develop a new tool, which is metrics, and which we now give a look to. And we decided that we had to address some of the limitations we felt were present in the RQS. So the metrics tool was developed involving a large group of experts from many different countries and different backgrounds, developed transparently through a Delphi process, a modified Delphi process. So there was a first draft created by the steering committee, then the Usomi Radiomics Auditing Group overall discussed at length this draft and edited the items and changed them to reach a first final form, which was then evaluated by the whole panel in 4 rounds of evaluation to establish the definitions, and in the last round assign weights through a scoring system where we asked the panelists to essentially rank first categories of items, so study design, imaging data, segmentation process, imaging processing and feature extraction, feature processing, preparation for modeling, metrics and comparison testing and open science. And then there was a secondary ranking of the items within each category, and then a statistician with experience in bar statistics performed a conversion of these ranks into the final item weights. And the final results of this process are actually fairly straightforward. As we can see, we have 30 items, which are divided in these categories that we have just listed. And we provide an easy to use, I think, fairly accessible web page, but also there is an offline version if one prefers, where you can assign the scores and it automatically calculates all the results and totals in itself. And this is particularly relevant because one of the characteristics of metrics is also that we attempted to make it flexible as possible to account for the wider range of design studies that we have been seeing. Because since the first introduction of radiomics, things have changed quite a bit, especially with the growing use of deep learning. And a scoring tool today has to be designed to account for these changes in practices. And so you can see highlighted in red some conditionalities, up to 5 conditionalities, which can change which items are scoreable or not. And again, the web page is, I think, fairly easier to use because it accounts for these conditionalities automatically and allows you or inhibits you from scoring the items according to the conditions. And since this is something that's particularly relevant for us as the authors of metrics, we also provided in the paper some fairly straightforward flowcharts and algorithms to guide the user, especially in the first experiences, on how to use the conditionalities and how to select them. And these are mainly tied to 2 points in the study, essentially. So segmentation, if it was performed at all, because you can have deep learning studies, especially with weak labels, not performed at an image level. And if it was performed, if it was automated or not, essentially. And then tied to the use or not of deep learning. So you can have a pipeline tied to classical handcrafted radiomics, or you can use deep learning, which in turn can lead to so-called deep radiomics or a full deep learning end-to-end pipeline. And again, these conditions are allowed to adapt the metric score to lead to a more nuanced assessment, reducing biases due to differences in study design, which are legitimate and should not impact one way or another the final score of the assessment. So let's look at some of the preliminary results of metrics, which I think are fairly interesting and help turn into practice some of the stuff I've been talking about, because this all seems nice in theory, but let's look at some head-to-head comparisons between RQS and metrics, which we have started to perform. So, for example, this is the latest effort by the Radiomics study group, still under review, but we performed a review focused on prostate MRI radiomics. This was, let's say, an update of a previous work that predates the creation of the group, which accounted for papers published up to June 2019, including June 2019. And so we updated starting from July 2019. And what we can see is that the RQS clearly presents lower results and significantly lower results overall compared to the metrics. And we can see how the metrics distribution appears quite normal and how we actually have a result that also matches better our experience and perception as we go through the papers and read them, that actually most of the papers hover around 60% scores, a sufficient score, rather than 23%. And so this is, I think, more accurate in reflecting the actual reality and state of the art of radiomics and AI research, where I think as of now, the situation is not as dire as we think. And I think if we applied the same scrutiny to research overall, I don't think the radiomics and AI are significantly different in terms of quality compared from radiological research overall as of now. And this is not what's reflected by the RQS, but obviously a comparison between papers published in different times in different papers with different tools is not ideal. So this is another recent paper, recent project I collaborated to, where we assessed endometrial cancer, radiomics and AI studies. And in this case, there was a head-to-head comparison using the same readers on the same papers who scored on using both RQS and metrics. And we can see that the trend is essentially the same. So what happened is that the RQS provided a significantly lower score compared to metrics. And again, we can see that most of the metrics papers cluster around 60%, so around a sufficient quality. And obviously, this, I think, reflects also our experience in reading the papers to perform the scoring, where most of the papers are okay, some are excellent and some are bad. But presenting the information or presenting a result where we consistently and systematically under-evaluate and underscore negative results for radiomics research, I think that's not an accurate result. And in the long run, we do pay a price, as mentioned earlier, if we continue doing that. So why should we prefer metrics? I think in our experience in these first use cases and in developing it, it is designed to be easier to understand, especially for new users. The conditionality of items helps us avoid the bias due to study design variation. And I think also that the issues that are highlighted in metrics, so when metrics papers are scored badly, or where papers are scored badly with metrics, the issues are more relevant to clinical practice and tied to lack of validation, lack of comparison to clinical standards and baseline models, so lack of proof of added value compared to current practices. However, before closing the presentation, I would like to go back to the concept of auditing, because we have been talking about essentially the first 4 parts of the cycle, but this is not enough. So hopefully we need to continue performing reviews based on scoring tools such as metrics to push and pressure the authors into improving their practices, including our own research, because we are also researchers active in this field. And then we have to repeat the cycle, because that's the only way to actually have an ongoing improvement. And I have to say that looking at trends in these first reviews, luckily there has been an improving trend, and hopefully the introduction of metrics will further strengthen this process. And this is my final slide, where I also invite you to look at these QR codes where you can reach the open access metrics paper and the web page where all the definitions are also shortly presented if you want to give it a look and you're curious. And then closing, just to remind you that, so my idea is that research auditing is essential to improve quality, and quality in research is essential for clinical translation. And while the RQS filled a void and had an important role since its introduction, we should now focus on metrics and the new tools that are available to further improve this process overall. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Renato, for your wonderful presentation in a very relevant topic, considering how many studies we are reading each month on radiomics, how many studies we are reviewing each month for several journals, and this paper is really illuminating. I'm also very happy to see QR codes, because as you know, I love so much QR codes in presentation. So I'm really satisfied also on this side. I would like to ask some comments from my partner in crime, Renato.
Yes, we have one question from Ricardo Teresa Ribeiro. How does metrics relate with the QIBA or IBSI standards and recommendations?
Yes, no, we also look not much at the QIBA, but more at the IBSI standards, also because those are the most commonly used, because they provide the most robust definitions of radiomics features. And I know they also provide their own checklists, but it was not really successful or well known. However, keep in mind that some of the panelists included in the metrics, as well as I think at least one of the authors in the CLEAR checklist, are also members of the IBSI group, and in the metrics more than one. So obviously their own opinions are incorporated in the metrics automatically as they were involved in the Delphi process and provided their own comments. So they were looked at by us in the first drafting. We looked at claim, at clear, also the IBSI guidelines mainly, other than our own experience in practical research and as reviewers of research, of meta research papers. And so there is no direct integration, but there is an implicit one because it was part, let's say, of the substrate upon which the metrics tool was then developed, and the authors of those guidelines were also included in the author group and the panel. So I think they should be covered as well automatically.
Thank you. One interesting thing of your presentation was indeed the U shape, which really don't like to see in research.
Yeah, yeah, no,
and then the comparison with the last project that you that really struck my attention as well. So if we look at the results so far, also with the metrics tool, with the scoring system, which, as you mentioned with your final sentences as well, quality is very, very important to progress, right, in research, and why we do research and why we want to implement things or dissolve things. So for future research, if you would look within the scoring system, which part of the scoring system is lacking the most with future research? Like what would you propose for people who are now, I mean, writing a paper or doing research in radiomics? Where should we focus on in improving to get the scores higher?
Well, I think metrics is designed to be fairly straightforward. I think what's commonly lacking today is, and I think it's lacking because it's hard to maybe to achieve, is the proof of added value compared to what we're currently doing. So one of the main issues in radiomics and AI is that we can develop any kind of tool, but then demonstrating that there's actually a benefit in using it, it's hard. It can be in terms of time saved, but how do you prove that you're saving time actually on a large scale, but also in terms of accuracy? You know, you can have a tool that maybe goes very well, performs extremely well, but does it perform sufficiently better than radiologists to justify another expense and another layer of complication and technical infrastructure that you have to implement? And often I see now lately there are some trends also in research, and decision curve analysis are going very strong lately. But as I see them, they're almost always implemented in the wrong manner, and so it's you know, there are biases even in this kind of approaches, and also in the tools that we use for scoring. That's why we decided there was a need for a new tool compared to RQS, because we've seen there was a bias in the tool as well. So as a researcher, I would focus on added value and proving not only the performance, but that the performance has an impact, has a concrete impact, either on our workflow or on the patient management, beyond vague promises of personalized medicine, which are always nice. But
I think we're stepping a bit away from
but a bit too general maybe, because it could be to personalized medicine. So what does that mean? Actually.
Yeah, that was the focus in the past few years, right? I mean, we have to.
But personalized medicine, it's everything and it's nothing. It's personalized. It's actually applicable. Otherwise, if it's not something that's actionable right now, it's.
Yeah, and I know one of the big things in general with also new algorithms or tools there is external validation, which works good in some practice, but if you try to generalize it, it generally performs worse.
No, but that's also an issue, because the world is a very wide place. So even if ideally I can involve 10 institutions, but how can I prove that this is representative of everywhere? It never ends. And that's also part of the issue with regulations, because ideally you should fine-tune a model. So you should develop a model and do some fine-tuning in every institution, but that's actually not really allowed, because you should have a validated model that's a fixed thing in time, and training, and then you have to fit that in clinical practice. But it's a bit counterintuitive because it's not what's being done in machine learning elsewhere. So what we know works elsewhere is not really 100% translatable and applicable healthcare. So we have to a bit, let's say, work around these limitations, and it's not easy.
Differences. Yeah, I totally agree. I
Wonderful.
Questions.
I think that please, Pinar.
No, I think I'm out of questions. I don't know if you have any further questions. I think we're also
Okay, yeah.
time.
I think we are about to close because we are 7:30. So I think it's better to come to close, and another time. Thank you, Renato, for illustrating us your paper, and Pinar, all of us have an appointment in the middle of October.
Yes,
this year.
I was going to say I have just one small announcement to make, and that's save the date for our annual meeting in Pisa again this year on the 11th and 12th of October. After a successful year last year, we hope to see you all again, and that you join us.
We had 2 days of very entertaining meeting. We had the possibility to meet with everyone, and I hope that this year we will be more and more, because we want to make some fun, to have some fun in Pisa. And I hope all the people are attending this webinar will come to Pisa another time, and also there will be me, Pinar, Renato, and also Paola Rinaldi. So please come to Pisa next October.
Yes, join us.
And join the challenge as well.
Oh,
yeah. Well, definitely. There will be also the AI challenge, and I think that will be more interesting, and I think we will have a lot of fun also in that day. Okay, this time is also this episode comes to an end, and I was so happy to stay here. Pinar, to you, the conclusion of the webinar.
Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Renato, again for your wonderful presentation and enlightening us about the tools within radiomics. And thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you soon with our next webinar, and of course in October.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.